So next up we have Peter Miscovich, a favorite of the Worktech audience. He's the managing director with Jones Lang LaSalle Strategic Consulting Practice. He develops corporate strategies and innovative solutions that help to enable change. So, Peter, take it away.
Thank you, Cindy. I thought I'd focus today on resilience and adaptation. This has been a personal passion of mine over the last 4 years. It began with the convening of the Rockefeller Foundation in 2009, looking at the concept of climate risk and the fact that climate change would be increasing exponentially. And we have the choice of mitigation, but we also have the choice of resiliency and adaptation. And so in today's presentation, quickly, I will review urban resilience, workplace resilience, and a couple of concepts on personal resiliency and how that might apply to everyone. So what are we experiencing today? We're experiencing complexity, disruption, and risk. And we're experiencing these phenomena in a converging and accelerating manner. Complexity is defined as a whole made up of complicated or interrelated parts. Disruption is to throw into disorder. Risk is a possibility of loss or injury or creating a hazard. If we look at these three very potent factors, why are they converging? And I'll just name a couple of examples. Digital transformation is transforming all industries, as was highlighted earlier today. We have global talent structural deficits. There are actually 200 million people unemployed in the world, and there are incredible talent shortages across the developed world and the emerging markets. We have a globalization paradox. Elongated supply chains are being brought back to localized regions. GE is pulling manufacturing out of China due to increasing labor costs. I'll share with you another passion on robotics. As manufacturing robotics and workplace robotics comes into being, we will see intelligent robots here in the US replacing a number of current positions. Disruption. The Great Recession of 2008, I think we can all agree was very disruptive. The European debt crisis of 2009, and I'll also speak about Superstorm Sandy, which was a climate risk disruption here in the New York area. In terms of risk, global climate risk, global cybersecurity risk, and global pandemic risk. Last week, $45 million was stolen in 10 hours through cyber criminals here in New York City via backpacks. So not only are these three factors converging, they're going to be with us for decades. Why? Climate change is increasing. Creative destruction is accelerating due to technology advances. Digital transformation is the new normal. No industry will be spared. And I would also add that no individual will be spared. Survival of the fittest, we'll have 80 million millennials come into the workforce by 2020. And as Diane was pointing out, that millennial workforce will have a huge impact in terms of our workplace design, our change management, and we will be undergoing a work-life revolution. So, in light of all of that, how do we become more resilient and adaptive? Resilience is defined as an ability to recover or adjust easily to misfortune or change. Adaptation, modification of an organism that makes it more fit for existence under the changing conditions of its environment. We as individuals, we as organizations, we as communities will need to become highly resilient and highly adaptive to these upcoming changes. So quickly, I'm going to run through some of the current themes in urban resilience. I serve on the board of the Regional Plan Association. We're developing the 40-year infrastructure plan for the New York region. The New York region will go from 21 million folks to 30 million folks by 2030. Superstorm Sandy was a tremendous wake-up call to this region. And if we think about urban resilience, we have to think about these questions. What if we experience more terrorist events? What if we experience new global pandemics? What if we experience more frequent hurricanes? What if we lose water? What if we lose mobility? What if the lights go out? As some of us realize, the lights going out for 10 days or 2 weeks in Lower Manhattan had tremendous consequences in terms of business disruption, personal disruption. And the World Urban Campaign is defining a resilient city as one that can withstand and recover quickly from any natural or human-made disaster. So a little bit about disruption and catastrophe from the insurance industry, presented 2 weeks ago with Swiss Re. The evolution of catastrophic insurance risk is increasing from $50 billion in 1980 to close to $200 billion last year. The insurance industry is very concerned about climate risk and catastrophic failures. This is another example of $15 trillion of risk between the coast of Texas to the coast of Maine due to hurricane risk alone in the coming year-over-year risk analysis. One reason for this, we have higher urbanization in coastal regions, sea level rise, sea level temperature rise, greater frequency of intense storms. Florida's population has increased 600% from 1950 to 2010. So clearly, the risk envelope is increasing. And just a little bit about our future. How do we adapt to future superstorms of hurricane in the New York region? We're working on a project right now. How do we evacuate 2 million people in 8 hours in the New York region if we were to experience a more potent superstorm for the next round of Hurricane Superstorm Sandy? Boston, for the good people in Boston, an amazing story post a horrific event about how the resiliency of that community gathered together and the technologies that were used to create the capture and if you will, the apprehension of the terrorists. And then finally, one of my favorite examples of the future is a little community of 5,000 folks in Cambodia. 5,000 folks live on the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. Their children go to schools that are floating schools. They have solar panels and generators to have electrical capacities. The entire community is resilient with sea level rise or with other climatic events that might occur. And it's interesting, it's an example of how we're beginning to adapt to climate change rather than fighting it. The other interesting opportunity is to look at our networks within urban centers. This is Paul Baran's work from 1964 from RAND. Centrality, decentrality, and distributed networks are the most resilient. Multiple nodes. And I would also offer that in terms of workplace, from what we saw this morning, distributed nodal workplace strategies may be our future. I'd like to credit Cisco for developing a tremendous diagram showing the art and practice of connectedness, innovation, productivity, and resilience as a new societal model. And the folks at Cisco and IBM and elsewhere are very concerned about how do they create technologies to support this model from a community perspective. And finally, on urban resilience, we're going to have low-cost technologies. The iPhone of 2018 will be $5. Natural human interfaces, entire citizenry will be enabled by technology within communities. How do we use these technologies to transform life within the urban environment? A little bit about workplace resilience. Some good questions. What if our business becomes obsolete? What if technology disrupts our business? What if we can't find the right talent? What if 50% of our workforce becomes contingent? Excuse me, a little water. What if we've got to reduce costs by 50%? And what if no one comes to the office? What if the office is the least interesting option that we have in terms of a place to work? In looking at these questions, a little history. This is from 2007. China today is about 50 rentable per person. In the US, we're still at 200, 250. EU and Japan a little less. But what's fascinating, this is from Dr. Norman Miller. We see a very interesting bell curve that peaked in 1990 in terms of US office consumption. So clearly we're on an efficiency trend line that's moving downward. Will it end up at 50 square feet per person, 100 square feet per person? TBD, but clearly the trend is to use less space and use it more efficiently. The other interesting factor that was brought this morning is the human cloud. Last year we spoke about hyper-specialization. This is scalable labor. defining tasks in atomized bits. And Mechanical Turk, Elance, Odes, workforce as a service, workplace as a service. Diane mentioned the contingent workforce. By 2030, we may have 80% of our workers be contingent and autonomous. And this will be disrupting current workplace and workforce strategies. In terms of workplace disruption, emerging technologies, digital physical convergence is occurring, the Internet of Things, workplace robotics. The CIO magazine announced last week there are 10 positions now that can be replaced by intelligent robots. And we're going to see robotic engagement and man-to-human-machine engagement continue. So what's our model today? This is the historical workplace. Today we've optimized it through change management, digital transformation, technology integration, mobility, work-life integration. What is our model for tomorrow? We're going to go from an optimized version to a network version. Cognitive computing will mean that we'll not use a keyboard or even voice commands. We're going to be able to command technology via our minds. And that brings in a whole different scenario in terms of how we work. Unified communications, technology, densities, social business will be the new model. Very efficient, highly networked, highly resilient. And finally, our objectives will be improving collaboration, connectivity, and managing complexity, risk, and disruption. No matter what happens to the organization, how can the workplace be resilient and adapt to all these changes? And finally, a couple thoughts on personal resilience. I'll just share a personal story. In 2005, on an August morning, I woke up at 5:30, and I couldn't move my left hand. I was paralyzed on the left side, going down towards my hip and leg, and within an hour, I was in the emergency room of Lenox Hill Hospital. And I spent 12 hours in intensive care, multiple tests, 2 exploratory surgeries, and I had experienced a stress-induced paralysis. And I learned in 2005, I was a partner of a Big Four firm, that one's well-being and one's self-care requires resilience and adaptation. And I think no matter how crazy life gets and no matter how crazy the world gets, we need to think about our own personal resilience. And from that episode, my doctors forced me to take 6 months off from work. I learned some new skills around personal resilience. And in mentoring folks these days, I always ask, what if you become terminally ill? What if you lose your spouse? What if you lose your job? What if your company becomes obsolete? What if your skills are no longer relevant? What if you are replaced by an intelligent robot? We really need to ask ourselves these skills, and we need to look at some essential strategies. Who are we? What are our personal assets? What are the market realities for our skills and for our companies? Personal networks matter. How do we experiment with our personal identity? How do we reinvent ourselves? And we need, and I feel a little bit like Madonna some days, we need to reinvent ourselves every 18 months professionally. I mean, and those of you who know